students across the nation face the struggle of standardized testing. We go through the torture of it every year. The stress of studying mixed with the anxiety of the actual test is too much to handle for the majority of students. Now just imagine if you had experienced that same testing, except you couldn't read, or you were mute, or maybe you were even deaf. Around America, students have these common or restricting disabilities, yet they have to face the exact same strenuous testing that students without disabilities do. I believe that students with disabilities should not be forced to take standardized tests and instead take tests that suit their mental capacity. It is simply unfair, unnecessary, and overall just harmful for the students to take these tests. So we hear it all the time. School systems should treat all students equally, or the age all, treat all people the same. These statements seem harmless and fair, but if looked into deeper, the flaws will show. It is unfair to base every child's mental skills on the exact same testing. Michelle Reed argues that exempting students with disabilities is unfair, but fair isn't just everybody getting the same treatment. Fair is more along the lines of everybody receiving what they need in order to be successful. This is best illustrated by this photo. Equal would be each person receiving a box to stand on, yet fair would be each person receiving what is necessary for their viewing. So sure, for all students to be treated equally sounds nice, but in reality, many students with disabilities aren't feeling very equal to their peers. School systems should instead try to treat students more fair. In this case, students with certain disabilities should never have to experience standardized testing. Just because things are equal, it doesn't mean that they are fair. As said by Albert Einstein, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Using the same basis of testing for every student goes against all fairness. Not all students comprehend the same way, therefore being treated the same in terms of testing isn't always the correct path to follow. So as I stated before, the testing of students with disabilities is just completely unfair. There are many horror stories around America of disabled students going through standardized testing. One specific story is that of an 11-year-old Florida student, Ethan Radisky. He was born with brain damage. Even though he was blind, had cerebral palsy, and had trouble saying basic words like yes or no, he was forced to take a state-mandated standardized test over a 2-week period. Ethan Radisky had many restricting disabilities, yet he had to take the annual standardized testing that was made mandatory in Florida, and not just one small test. This test lasted for 2 weeks. This type of treatment of students is just unfair. Imagine sending your blind child with cerebral palsy to school for 2 weeks knowing he wouldn't actually be learning the things he needs, for example, Braille, and instead just taking tests over things he can't even begin to comprehend. That shouldn't just be accepted, and this treatment is careless. Everything about Ethan's experience is unfair to him, his teachers, and his parents. So some people argue that the testing doesn't actually hurt the disabled students, that they just write whatever and it's nothing to them, but that isn't always the case. Some of these state-mandated tests cause a lot of mental torture, and we can't determine how they feel for them. But in other cases, they actually impose physical issues too. Ethan Radisky's mother stated that the testing procedure was extremely physically taxing for him, requiring him to sit in his wheelchair for long periods of time and focus on black and white pictures, which are difficult for him to perceive. After the testing sessions, he is physically exhausted and often develops pressure sores from sitting in his wheelchair. He also has developed respiratory infections from fluid pooling in his lungs from the long testing sessions. Even though this is an extreme case, it still happens. Ethan actually developed infections that were very bad for his health given the condition he was already in. All of this horrible health issues imposed on him just because he was forced to take a state-mandated test, and there should have been other options for a child like Ethan. So next, standardized testing of disabled students is just completely unnecessary. Standardized testing hasn't shown much improvement among students K through 12. After the No Child Left Behind Act was passed in 2002, the U.S. slipped from 18th in the world in math to 31st place in 2009, with another big drop in science and no change in reading. This data shows that standardized testing in America hasn't even been beneficial to non-disabled students. In fact, it has caused the United States to decline significantly in our national testing rankings. This illustrates that how that for even students without disabilities, standardized testing has only been worse for student achievement. So for students that do have these disabilities, the testing is even less useful. A teacher wrote about her experiences with giving her disabled students tests, saying that her kids were asked to take a writing exam in which they listened to and took notes on an informational text. And then they took notes and were expected to write a paragraph or more relating to the topic. Her children did as they were asked to the best of their ability, but in the beginning, most of them were unable to accurately even write their name. Experiences like these happen every day in the United States. The students who are being forced to take these tests couldn't even write their name correctly, and it is so unnecessary for children who don't know how to write their name to be taking tests that are much higher than their comprehension levels. Students should be taking tests that accommodate to their learning levels. Standardized testing is a common stress shared among all students. Students that face certain disabilities should not be forced to take such state-mandated testing. It is simply unfair, unnecessary, and harmful to them. Students who are blind, deaf, mute, and unable to read, autistic, or have any other straining disabilities should not take state-mandated testing. Such students should be offered another option of not testing or testing over subjects that are actually useful for them. For example, the students around the country who are blind should be allowed to take tests that is more focused on Braille or understanding easier topics. Or for students who are mute, they could complete tests given by their speech therapists that help them learn topics actually impactful, important, and crucial to their lives. Disabled students shouldn't be held down by the strain of standardized testing, and they shouldn't be allowed to take tests, and they should be allowed to take tests that suit their mental capacity.